Hello, my name is Morne McCartney and I'm doing Excel for Accountants. So this is part 2 of doing account aging in an Excel spreadsheet, where I'm going to focus on my preferred method. As you saw from our previous workings, you have all these columns in the pink section which you basically have to keep on the same sheet as where your ledger is. So instead of having so many columns although the formula is now a lot easier than my first version, which was totally done in Excel with no VBA whatsoever, it is still a lot of columns to have to carry in your ledger. So what we want to get to is just a single column in our ledger, and what we want is that in this single column we want it to tell us directly in which section year it belongs. In other words, what we wanted to say is it is going to show us current, or 30 days, or 60 days, or 90 days, whatever is the actual days. And it's then going to make it a little bit easier for us to look up, because what we're going to do is we're going to use some ifs. We're going to pick up the column as our sum range. Our first criteria range is then the supplier. Then the supplier will need to match this value, which is a drop-down box. And then our next criteria is just going to be whether it is the status of it, and that needs to match whatever is next to it here. So in that case, if it says current, then we want the value to be pulled through here. So in the case where it is AB, we want to see 2000. Obviously this doesn't cater for when we say all, so we still need an if statement to catch the all. So we're going to say if this equals all, then we're just going to do a sum if, and that sum if is just going to look at the range year matching our range year and return the value. So that's if it is true, and if it is false, it's going to do the sum ifs. And now we can basically we can copy this down. We just need to fix all the ranges that is fixed. So M4 is always going to be in that position, so that we can fix. The column, the F's and B's, they won't move down because we've selected the entire column. And the current, we want it to move down as it copies down, so I think that is what is needed. Let me just double check. So here it is still the same, so that works fine, and we just need to copy up to there. So this sum is not going to add up because we don't have a value next to each and every one of these. But that's basically what we want our function now to do. Is we want, I'm just going to move that header up to there. So that's going to be aging. And obviously these 30, 60, 90 and current that I typed in here now doesn't match the dates, because we're going to build a formula to actually determine which one of those are valid. And that means that all of these columns we can also get rid of. So that would be the only helper function that you, or column that you will need on your Excel spreadsheet. So it makes it a little bit more streamlined, it makes it a little bit better. And all we need to do is build a function that's going to compare these two dates. It doesn't need to return amounts or anything else. It just needs to compare the two dates and put in whether it is current, 90 days, 60 days, whatever the case may be. So to do that, we're going to jump back into Visual Basic, and we're going to create a second module, which I'm calling Aging Method 2, and the function what I'm going to pass is just the two dates. So I'm not passing the transaction amount or any of that. I'm just passing the aging date and the transaction date. So what I want here, obviously we want to do option explicit to avoid the problem that we saw in our previous piece of code. And these two variables we're not going to declare because they are what's being passed to our function from our spreadsheet. So essentially their space have already been dimensioned because the Excel spreadsheet cells are also like variables, but that automatically gets dimmed by Excel. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that is going to deduct the two from each other. So we're going to call it dim date difference, and we're going to dim that as an integer, and then we're going to use that date difference, and we're just going to pick up the difference between the two dates. So transaction date, and we want the aging date minus the transaction date. Okay, now that is not what we want to return to our cell, because this is going to just give us a number, which is the days that the two dates differ from each other. So what we want to do is we want to do an if statement. If date difference is greater than or equals to 0 and date difference is smaller or equals to 29, then aging method 2, which is our function, so that's the thing that's going to get returned to our Excel spreadsheet, equals current. So unfortunately with this method, the downside is that you're hard coding these things into your Excel spreadsheet. I mean into your VBA code. So if you want to make a change to it, how it handles it, you'll have to do that in the code. Whereas the other methods, it basically you can change just the date ranges here. So all methods that you are going to devise will have its upsides and its downsides. And this specific one's downside is that the person who does the code is also going to be the one that's going to maintain it. So I'm copying a couple of them because we want obviously multiple conditions to be able to be fulfilled. So I'm going to do a 60, a 90, a 120. And then my date is going to, for that is going to run up to 29, this one's going to run up to 59. This one is going to run up to 89. This one is going to run up to 119. And now the benefit of this one is we don't have to just put a 99999 into this field, because we can just say anything that is greater or equals to 120, and we don't need to set it up a limit. Okay, and now we just need to tell it what it must put down. So in this case it's going to put 30, this case it's going to put 60, here it's going to put 90, and as you can see these numbers I'm putting through to the sheet as a string, because we're going to be using it as a string on our Excel spreadsheet. And then this one is going to be 120. So we can test it with the aging method function that we've got here, and we're going to pass to it this date and the transaction date, and you can see that it doesn't work, because remember we didn't fix the aging date's position. So again it's moving down to ledger and so forth. So we just want to fix that position. And there we have it. And now we literally don't need these fields anymore. So this will be my only field that I would have on the sheet. And as I said, I normally color it in pink if I'm going, and then I would hide this field. Now, something that we did not keep in mind with this, with our stuff so far, is what normally when you type in a new date, Excel is not going to know to put the formula next to it, which means your aging is going to fall flat because it's not going to add that transaction into your aging. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a little function. We're actually going to build two functions. The one is if we put AC on here, we want to make sure that you can select AC from this list, which means we want it to, every time we click the button, when we confirm the ledger, it must run through all of these, go and check if these names are on the supplier list, and if it is not here, it must add it. And then the second thing that it must do is it must make sure that the aging field next to it is populated if there's a value in it. And so I'm going to add this in here so long, but I'm not going to add this in here, so I can show you how we're going to get to that. So just want to color them in a bit. Going to just make it green again. Oops, I made it blue. Doesn't really matter, but let's make it green. And then also you can see that this field is not a drop-down box, and ideally we want a drop-down box, so we can paste it and then just delete the fields, and now this would be a drop-down box. But you can see now we cannot select it because it's not on the list. So we can go and add it on the list. And this is one way of controlling it, to make sure that, but if you're working with a list where there is no drop-down boxes, then you would want it to come and check this list, and if an item doesn't exist, it must come and add it onto this section. Alternatively, you can just copy your drop-down boxes down as far as you think you're going to be using, but there is a programmatic way of doing this as well, which I'm going to show you. So first things first, let's jump into Visual Basic, and we're going to create a new module. And this module, let's call this one, so this is going to be where we're going to check if the supplier exists. So I'm just going to call it mod supply exists. And for this one, this is not going to be a function because we're not going to call it with an equal sign out of Excel. We're actually going to put a button down on our sheet. So to do a button, there's multiple ways of doing button. The one I like most is to use a shape and just put the shape down, and then in the shape I will just double click and I will just type there verify suppliers list. You can call it whatever you want. So I'm just going to make it a little bit wider, and then I'm just going to center that. Oops, I'm not in it, so not centering the right thing. There we go. So when I click this button, I basically want to run through the list and check whether the supplier exists. So for this purpose, I'm going to create, I'm going to just undo this drop-down boxes that I did here. And I'm going to put AC in there, and I'm going to remove it off the supplier list. So as I said, there's two ways of ensuring that all your suppliers are there. The one is to do the drop-down boxes, and that will force the person to come and add them to suppliers before they can actually do the entry. But if you're working from a list that you may be exported from an existing accounting system or something like that, then that would not really be practical, because you're not going to know whether you're not going to have the supplier list pre-created. I mean, you could, by exporting your suppliers first and adding them to the supplier list and then exporting your ledger. But it might be a data set where you don't have the supplier list, and in that case you do want that verification to be done to make sure that you actually have a drop-down box that AC is represented on. Otherwise you're going to have an entry here which is not being aged. So for that purpose we're going to build a little helper function here in our supplier list. So match is just an header, and this value that is here is going to be pulled from the ledger. It's going to basically copy the first cell, paste the value in there, and it's going to tell it true or false whether it exists in this column. And the way we do that is with this statement. So the first part of it is a match of this value in this cell, and that is going to be an absolute match, so it must be 0. It can't be close enough, it must be exactly that, otherwise it needs to create it. So now if we do a match, just to show you here, match this in this with an absolute value, a total match. So if it can't find the value, it's going to give me an error. If it can find the value, it's going to give me the row number in which it found it, the position in which it found it. So I want to swing that around, because I want, firstly, if there is no match, I want to know, I want it to not show me an error. So I'm going to use the isError statement. So in other words, but now you can see it swaps it around the wrong way, because if it is not here, it says true, and if it is here, it says false, and I want to know if it matches. So it must give me, if it can find a match, I want a true, and if it can't find a match, I want a false. So the way I'm going to do that is by swinging the sign. So in front of it, I'm going to put an if statement. If this is the case, then, so in other words, if finding it gives an error, then it means it doesn't exist. So then I want a false. And you can see it's a Boolean. I'm not putting quotes around it. It's not a string that I'm trying to return. And true if it can find it. So now all shows true and AC shows false. And that's basically how this formula is put together. Okay, so now we're going to use our code to come and pick up, to basically go to the ledger, step through every cell, take that value, put it in here, and grab the value that is there to decide whether it must insert the value. So the code that we're going to use in the developer is doing a dim for the supplier name from the ledger. And that's a string, so that's where we're going to store the actual name of our supplier. Then we're going to do the flag, so that is where we're going to pick up that flag that tells us whether it's true or false. And then in the code we are going to have a ledger count, because we want it to count from 4 to 13. So first I'm going to show you just the hard-coded way from 4 to 13, but remember, we're not going to know, we know it starts at 4, but we don't know where it ends. So we're going to add another function after I've shown you this, just to determine by itself how many lines there are. Okay, so the supplier name from ledger we're going to pick up from the worksheet. So we're going to worksheet ledger, and we're picking up the value that is I. So I is 4 to 13, so that's going to represent the line number. So we're going to pick up I in the first round. I is going to be 4, and therefore AB is going to be the value that's going to be pulled in, because that sits in line 4, column 3. Then it's in the next increment, that will be 5. So then it will pick up the next line and the next and the same column. And so it will continue until it's matched every single one up to line 13. At the same time, we want, after we've picked up this AB or AC or AA, we want it to be placed on the supply list in this green cell. And the way we're going to do that is we are swapping the function, this instruction around. We're now telling it in this worksheet on the supply list in a specific cell 1,4. We want you to put that supplier name that you collected from the ledger. Then we wanted to go to the supplier lists and pick up whether it is true or false. So that sits in cell in row 1, column 5, and it's going to pick up that. And then we're going to do an if statement to determine what we're going to do if it is false and what we're going to do if it's true. So if supplier exist flag equals true, equals false, then, and now we basically, if it is false, then we want to write the supplier name that we've collected into the next cell, which is 3. But remember, that also is not always going to be 3. So worksheet, and it's going to be 1 in 1,3 is where we want to write it. Okay. Where's my error? Then worksheet. Okay, sorry. So in that worksheet, we want to set then the supplier name from ledger. That's what we want to put in there. Okay, so this is going to work if the list is always 13 long and position 3 is always open, but that's not going to be the case. So how do we handle those? So the first thing we need to do is this is our dim counters, and that ledger entry count as integer is one of the counters. Okay, so now the ledger entry count is going to help us with that. So the way we're going to do that is we want to be able to go and collect every time that this loop runs. We want to go and collect what the ledger entry count is. Actually, we only need to do it right in the beginning, before the loop starts. Because remember, when the loop starts, you're not going to be able to update your ledger while the loop is running. So we're going to do worksheet function dot counter, and remember the counter function is an Excel function, that's why it's worksheet function. So we're going to collect the ledger entry count from the worksheet function counter. Worksheet is the ledger, and the range is A to A. Let's just double check that. No, it is C to C. So, sorry, let's get back to that. So we want to collect C to C. Now you have to remember, we have a cell here that has no value in it, because this ledger is just centered, it's actually sitting in this cell. So we're going to have one count less than what we should have. So we're going to need to add 1 to that count. Okay, so because what we want is it to kick out, and we can test that by stepping through it. Variable not defined, oh, I is not defined. So we need to dim I as integer. Okay, so the ledger counter should give us 13 because that's the last line, and that's what it does give. So now we can use this ledger count and we can go and pick up, so if supplier exist flag, let's see, instead of this 13, we're going to put the ledger entry count. So now it will step from 4 to whatever the entry is that is. So if there's 20 entries, it will, or 20 lines, in other words, counting every single line, then it will run up to line 20. So now we have a way of managing that, but we still don't have a way of putting it in the right cell on the supplier list. So to do that, we're going to do a counter for the supplier list so we can determine what the next number is. And that we're going to do here. So I'm going to dim a supplier list count as an integer, and we're going to take that supplier list count, and that supplier list count, remember this loop is going to run through all of the code, so we can't put it in front of the loop because the loop may increase in size. As we loop through, it's going to add entries, and we're not going to be checking how many entries there are again. So we actually need to put this inside the loop. And we're going to do the same worksheet function that we did here. It's just going to be for a different sheet and in a different column. So the sheet is going to be supply list, and the range is going to be, we want to look at column A, and there isn't an extra gap somewhere in that our list, so we don't need to add one to it. And it's complaining about my double equals. It's not Python, so it doesn't want the double equals. And so the first increment, it's picking up that there's 13 entries. So, well, let's just start this code from scratch. So it's picking up the ledger entry count is 13, so it's going to do I from 4 to 13. It's going to pick up first what my supplier list count is, and it's picking up that there's 2 entries. Then it goes and picks up the name from the ledger, and it's AB. Then it comes and puts it down in cell D1. Okay, so we just jumping. The reason why it always jumps to this is because we have automatic calculation on. So it's actually every now and again it's updating our previous functions. So I'm just going to switch automatic calc off. So formulas, I'm going to have to do it here. Formulas, and I'm going to just say manual calc. We just need to remember to go and put it on again, but that just prevents it from automatically refreshing while we do running our code. Okay, so I'm just holding that. Let's step through our code again. Okay, so it gets the supplier name is AB, which is our first one on the ledger. Then it comes and puts AB into our worksheet here. It collects whether it's true or false. So it's false because AB is not on the list. If supplier exist flag is false, then we want to add it to the next position. Now, with the way that this is at the moment, that's actually also wrong. It was supposed to be 3,1, because otherwise we're going to add it into this cell here, which needs to say match. So this 3 will hold true in this first loop, but it's not going to hold true in every loop after that. So what we need to do is this supplier list count we need to add in here, because every time that it adds a list in there, that number will get to be one higher in the next loop. So let's run through this and let's see if it actually is going to add it in the right position. And it did not. It overwrote our all because the position, the supplier count is 2, so it's telling us what the last position is. So what we need to do is add 1 to that last position in order to get it into the right. So I'm going to just drag this little arrow back 1 step. I'm going to put my all back in here, go back to Visual Basic and step it again, and now it's adding it in the right position. Okay, so now it is incrementing the I to 5. So it's going to go to the ledger entry 5, and 5 is going to be, you can see these are showing values because remember we disabled automatic calculation. So once we step through this, I'll re-enable it and then everything should work again. Okay, so now it is picking up the next level, the next AB. Unfortunately, it's going to step through every, so it's going to duplicate check some of the entries. But it doesn't matter because if it puts AB into the cell now, it's going to not get a false, it's going to get a true. And for that reason, it would not add it into the list again. Okay, but because we've got automatic calc off, remember automatic calc also determines whether this cell recalculates. So we are going to get an error in the process. We need to go and switch it on again. So just back on automatic, and let's run the code and see if it works. So I'm just going to F8 and then I'm going to click the little continue button, and voila, it's created the code. Now you can see it's not in the correct order. Okay, so it's not in order, but let's sort it. So what I'm going to do is I don't want to sort the all into a different position. I want all to always be at the top. So I'm just going to select that portion of the data there all the way down to the end. And then I'm going to say developer, okay, record a macro, and I'm going to say data sort column A, and I want it sorted from A to Z on cell values. Okay, and now that we've done that, we just need to go to developer and stop the recording. And then we can go to this one that says module 1. So we're going to call it sorter. I'm going to remove these comments. And there we have a sorter. So I'm going to just call it mod sorter. And sorter. Okay, so my sorter is now a separate subroutine, which I also am going to make public. And from the supplier events, the moment I've done this, I can just call my sorter to sort whatever has been created, and we can test whether it works by removing those entries and then going to the Visual Basic Code. Click on it, F8, and run it, and it's sorted and it's been added. So now we know that this function works. So now the only function that we've still got to build is the one where in the ledger we want to make sure that aging is being added. Now that is the section that we will tackle next. We are already stepping through every single line in our ledger in there. I think that we should just put the aging constructor into this section as well. So the way we're going to do that is basically I'm going to first just check if a supplier, I just want to see here, so Okay, so that's going to run through every single entry if it exists, if there is basically a supplier name attached to it. So at this point we do have a supplier name from the ledger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, after it's done this, let's just take that line out. I'm going to say if supplier name from ledger, and the length of that actually is greater or equals than 0, then, and so the then that we're going to do is we want to basically add this formula into this automatically. And if we look at it, it is basically the cell next to it and this absolute position at the top. So C1 is always going to be the exact same cell. It's just the B that is going to change. And the way we're going to need to do that is, remember the I that we've created in our code is the line number. So we can use that I to step the code as we move. So just to demonstrate. Okay, so we're going to take the worksheet. We want to basically do a copy of this. So we want I, and it's going to be I1. And that is going to be equals to. And now we're going to give it, well, it's actually its formula that's going to be equals to. And in this formula, it's going to be, it needs to be entered as a string. So from this, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it in there. Okay, so the C1 is always going to be the same. That we don't have to worry about. It's this portion that is going to change where the 13 is, because the B is also always going to be the same. It's just every time that it's a new line, it's going to increment this B, and that B is going to basically be equal to the I that we've created here. So how do we do this? We basically, instead of the 13, we're going to close that with a quote and open with another quote. And in between, we're going to have two ands. Okay? And in between that, we're going to stick our I. So just want to make it a little bit wider so you can see that code properly. So we say if the length of the supplier name is greater than 0, in other words, there's something in the cell. So it's greater or smaller than 0. It doesn't matter. We just basically, as long as it's not 0. Then the worksheet ledger cell that is going to be represented by the I, 1. In other words, if it's in line 14, it will be 14, 1. Will have the formula equals aging method 2, and that is, and then it's going to have a $C$1, comma B, and we're going to add to that line 14, because we're in line 14 then, and we're going to close the brackets. So let's run that and see if it works. So remember, this match supplier is now kind of a slightly different function, because it's now building your supplier list as well as making sure your aging is here. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to actually change the name to verify supplier, and then I'm going to add verify supplier macro into this button. So now if I remove these, let's quickly see if it works. And I'm going to remove those, and let's do them all in one go. Verify supplier. Did it do something? Let's quickly have a look. So it's created these. Whoopsie, something went very wrong in our code. So what happened? Oh no, it had to do it just moved right to the end. Okay, so for that reason it's also a good idea to just freeze your panes so you don't get a little surprise and think that something went wrong. So I'm freezing the panes there. On the suppliers, I want to freeze the pane on this entire line. And there we go. We have a function that creates these entries. It creates our suppliers, so we have all our suppliers here. Let's quickly test if we create a new one. So 1206 is today. We're going to create a new supplier AD, and it's going to be a 1500 invoice. And we're going to do AD a 300 payment. We're going to verify suppliers, and it's put current in on AD, and it's added AD to our list. So this is working fine. And now if we look at the aging of AD, it shows us that 1200 is the current aging, and that is correct because 1500 minus 300 gives you 1200. So our function works. I'm just going to change this to say verify supplier. And everything is basically working. It does our aging. It does everything that we set out to do with this, and we can now literally hide this column. Nobody needs to see it because your program, the moment you click verify, so that is just the important thing. If you've added an entry, you need to verify so that you make sure that it creates your formula and that it adds it into your supplier list. There is another option of being able to add your verify automatically without the button click, and I think I'll do another session with that to show how when you make any modification you can automatically run your macro. So what it will be doing is looking at a change to your spreadsheet, and any change to your spreadsheet will automatically run your verification module. So I think we'll cover that in another module. I'm just going to pretty this up a bit. I normally like to make white boxes where you can actually fill in, and so for my ledger I would normally also just box this, but I would make it white. And then this is an area where you're not going to be filling in, so that I would leave as such. And yeah, I'm quite happy with what we've put together here. Just going to pretty it up a little bit, so going to just do that. Do a cell there, do this blue, and do that blue. Okay, so I'm happy with this. Thank you very much for watching the video with me, and yeah, if you like it, please subscribe and click the like button, and visit my website bringmesome.co.za where you can download the code for everything that I do. The code is freely available. You are welcome to copy it, to modify it, to use in your own programs. Thank you again for watching, and see you next time.